if we have a national emergency?
This is one of the things that we can shoot first and ask questions later. Normally you can't do that.
All of a sudden these trees started moving out of the way. They parted for me. And then I came out into this opening, and there where I saw Jesus Christ.
Back in 1927, an American socialist, Norman Thomas, 6 times candidate for president on the Socialist Party ticket, said the American people would never vote for socialism. But he said under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program. He is more imminent.
James Madison, in 1788, speaking to the Virginia Convention, said, "Since the general civilization of mankind, I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations."
When men were free.
Broadcasting live from a secret location buried deep below the earth, you're about to make a connection to the signs of the times. W. Dean Shook is live on the air right now.
Welcome in to End Time News. I am your host, W. Dean Shook, bringing you the news that the establishment media doesn't seem to want to report on. And we have got a hot one today. We're going to expose the truth about this immigration crisis, or so it's being called. Actually, it's a Trojan horse being used for jihad. We're going to go through that today. We're also going to look at how this may fit into end time prophecy, and we'll get to that. I want to start with an apology for our listeners on the Blog Talk Radio Network. Apparently, Blog Talk is only going to carry the first half hour of the program. After that, it's going to drop off. But there is a solution. We are still live, full program, on the iHeartRadio Network. We're also live on the Spreaker Radio Network. Now, if you don't get either one of those, you can also download the End Time News radio app for your iPhone or your Android. They're available on Google Play or at the App Store. But we've made it easier. We put a link to both of them on the webpage at wdeanshook.com. Just go to the webpage. It's right on the front of the page. It's absolutely free. You can download it today and never miss an entire episode of End Time News. There's also a player right on the webpage where you can listen right from the webpage, which would make it even easier. So let's get on with the news. So the question is this immigration crisis in Europe and soon coming to America a Trojan horse for jihad? Well, we're going to make a case with that, with reports out of the UN, and we're going to give a history of Islam and how they've used this in the past. So what happened to the migration crisis in Europe? Have you noticed the establishment media has gone silent on it? Well, I'll tell you why. The truth is coming out, and they don't want you to know what's really going on. In case you think that this recent flood of Muslim invaders into the West is purely Barack Hussein Obama's idea, maybe you need to dig a little bit deeper and understand this is all part of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees Transformation Agenda. This is via the influence of the Socialist International, SI. This agenda is nothing short of balkanizing Europe and the United States, making our lands filled with chaos, terrorism, strife, and wickedness. Now, you think I'm kidding? The New American reports it this way. The UN High Commission for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, and United Nations Children's Fund, that's UNICEF, their executive director, Anthony Lake, are the UN point men working closely with the Obama State Department. The active leadership in both of these individuals in the U.S. and the EU refugee policy is really cause for alarm. Even more alarming is the fact that they are not only troubling participants. The ranks of the UN officials involved in forming refugee solutions, quote unquote, are filled with persons including from communist China who have neither the interest nor the refugees nor the security concerns of the West in mind. Guterres is the former Socialist Party Prime Minister of Portugal and former President of the European Council. And most notably, he was, from 1999 to 2005, President of the Socialist International. the radical Marxist organization that includes many former communist parties that have been branded themselves as socialist or, the new name, Social Democrat, without significantly changing any politics or personnel. Although virtually unknown to most Americans, the Socialist International, SI, has been exerting enormous political influence worldwide since the 50s, especially through its dominant influence in the United Nations. And their goal is nothing less than world government. The Socialist International membership includes more than 160 socialist parties from more than 100 countries, including from 54 nations where SI member parties are currently running the show or sharing power in coalition government. And its 1962 Congress in Oslo, Norway, the Social International candidly said this, and I quote, "The ultimate objective of the parties of Socialist International is nothing less than world government. Membership of the United Nations must be made universal. The SI has never deviated from this objective, and it's used its growing influence to push greater empowerment of the UN and its agencies to the point that the UN is now on the brink of becoming a world government. SI has called on the European Union to reach a speedy agreement to handle in a fair and humane way this flow of so-called refugee and asylum seekers from the Middle East, and the organization said, quote, "While it's important to recognize that this is an issue of global dimension and requires countries from all continents assume their fair share of responsibility," how many times have we heard that? "It's crucial for Europe today to act in line with the values, the spirit, and the solidarity of a common progress upon which the EU was founded with the participation of our movement and in keeping with its moral and legal obligations." First, how does SI claim anyone must assume their fair share of responsibility? Where did that idea come from? And second of all, what is this claim of common progress? Take a look at the Middle East and take a look at the West. There are light years of difference between the progress of one and living in the dark ages for the other. And that's been the result of choosing to do so. The West has been based on the Christian faith, teaching victory in Christ over the nations, subduing the enemies of Christ through the gospel, and the Middle East, for the most part, has been subdued by the teachings of Allah, and we all see what that's resulted in. Well, SI continued their appeal to the world when they said the Socialist International remains committed to proclaiming political solutions to this crisis, convinced that political action is the only way to achieve these conditions necessary for peace, democracy, and equality. This position has been borne out at the numerous meetings in the Migration Committee, its regional committees, and its councils. The most recent of which, held at the UN headquarters in New York, adopted unanimously a charter for the rights of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers to which all of its member parties worldwide subscribed. And they said it almost like they expected this. At the SI Council meeting held at the UN in Geneva of 2014, Antonio Guterres, UN High Commissioner for Refugees and former president of the Socialist International, warned that the humanitarian system was reaching breaking point. SI said he also stressed the critical need to tackle the root cause that create humanitarian problems, which urgently need to be addressed from a political perspective. Others on the UN Interagency Standing Committee, the IASC, who are behind the scenes and have been pushing this agenda, including Helen Clark, Dr. Margaret Chan, and Anthony Lake, have been behind this whole thing. Well, the New American points out what these people and the State Department have been up to. Here's what they say. The collaborative relationship between the U.S. State Department and the UNHCR, including IASC, is spelled out formally in the State Department document 2014-2015 Framework for Cooperation between the United States Department of State's Bureau of Population, Refugee and Migration, and the Office of the United High Commission for Refugees. Now, I know that's a lot to unpack, but here's what it says. The document begins, the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration of the United States Department of State, hereafter referred to as PRM, and the Office of the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, hereafter referred to as UNHCR, have been working in a formal partnership through a framework for cooperation since the year 2000 to provide protection, humanitarian assistance, and durable solutions to UNHCR's beneficiaries. And it goes on to say, they have a unique relationship. PRM has long been UNHCR's top donor, while UNHCR has been PRM's largest multilateral partner. This bilateral framework for cooperation to advance shared objectives is solid. Ultimately, we can assume there's a greater end game than just being good humanitarians. Once this is in place and the chaos ensues, the UN will be called in to invade and keep the peace. With a global UN police force, this eventually seeks to be a predecessor to a one-world government because you have to have a way to enforce it. And if you're like me, you'd like to see the complete defunding of the United Nations by the United States and the removal of the organization and all of its tentacles from the United States. But as long as we have globalists in our government, this is what we can expect. It's only action on the part of the American people that can change this. This is up to you. Now I'm going to play you a clip here from Arthur Thompson, who explains this mass UN-led migration. Please listen to this clip.
Well, welcome back again this week to an analysis behind the news. Just got back from Washington, D.C., where I was talking to a number of aides for congressmen and that sort of thing on the free trade deal, and realized that unless they understand that there is a conspiracy to arrest the sovereignty of the United States and destroy the independence of the American people, they're falling for these so-called free trade deals. Won't get into the particulars, but it's the same thing with immigration. Unless you understand there's a conspiracy to break down the moral and social fiber of the various countries involved in taking in these refugees, you don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. They're too stupid is your answer to what they're doing. No, they're not stupid. There is a design to what they're doing. We all get these pictures, these heartstring tugging pictures of little kids and that sort of thing. But as we pointed out, in many, many of these locations in the European Union, these are very virile men. A lot of thousands of them, thousands of these virile men that they don't look like they've ever missed a meal. They're all buff, so on and so forth. But they always go after the little family, the little kids, the dead boy on the Turkish beach, that sort of thing, to tug at people's heartstring to let these others in that are never vetted. You know, we've been looking at this a long time, and it's becoming a serious problem in the European Union, but it's been going on for decades. It's been going on for decades in the United States as well, which we will show in a moment. But here out of the Wall Street Journal is refugee fight widens EU rift. And it says the European Union pushing through a plan that forces member states to take in migrants. Now, last week there was an article in the Financial Times, and it basically said to Greece, look, we'll take care of your refugee problem for you as long as you give us control over your borders. If Greece would do that, you see, they would no longer have a country. A country without borders is no longer a country, or a country that cannot control its borders. And yet the very next day, they took away that ability from every member of the EU to have this refugee resettlement scheme. And not just Greece. But it's interesting when you read some of these newspapers that most of you never read, like the Financial Times. It says some very interesting things. And, you know, I always look at 4 or 5 newspapers a day sometimes to get the real news. For instance, it says in here that the resettlement of these refugees will be only those that have come into Greece and into Italy. Now, this is 160,000 of just those that are in Greece and Italy. It doesn't count those in Austria, it doesn't count those in Croatia, doesn't count those in Hungary, and that kind of thing. So this is only a certain segment of these resettlements. It's only a portion of the problem that's getting the headlines. The rest of it is apparently being ignored, and they keep coming in. The other thing is, too, for instance, here's one out of the Washington Post. And the Washington Post always tells the truth, right? Anyway, they say the proponents of the plan acknowledged Tuesday that it was just the first step to address the much bigger crisis, according to the UN Refugee Agency, and that more than 477,000 people had arrived. So they're resettling this 160,000, but they acknowledge nearly 500,000. Then in addition to that, they say Germany's national railway company announced Tuesday that it was suspending railway service to Austria because the trains have been overwhelmed with refugees. Perhaps you've seen some of these shots where they're actually pushing people in through the windows to pack these trains with refugees who don't pay. And so I pity the poor people sitting in the seats. They paid for their ticket, and all of a sudden these kids are being tossed through the window at them. That sort of thing. Maybe some of you have seen those pictures. Despite Hungary's opposition of the asylum seekers, a government spokesman said Tuesday that his country would abide by the rules, by the plan. So in other words, it doesn't matter whether they're for it or against it, they'll abide by this. This is a compulsory decision, and we are going to respect it. So in other words, the EU has come down and made it mandatory for all these countries to bring in these refugees. So much for sovereignty, so much for controlling your borders, so much for independence. It's gone in the European Union. And this is the entity that politicians in Washington, D.C. and Obama want us to get involved and integrate with them into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And, the Transatlantic Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership is where they want us to do the same with China, with that as the first step. That's another story. They say that that when you are in Vienna, you can go anywhere, according to a refugee from Aleppo, Syria. So in other words, they're told, or that's the word on the street, if you can just get to Vienna, Austria, from there you can go anywhere. And that's part of the problem. I just got home from Vienna a couple of weeks ago, and believe me, the Muslim garb, the Muslim people are all over the place. Whole neighborhoods are nothing but Muslims. And now they want the United States to bring some of these in. And you can go to all the government websites and find out the requirements they have and the benefits these people will get when they get here. Now, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, these benefits that they say officially online are not quite accurate. They're bad enough, but they don't go quite as far as the reality of the situation, which I'll get into in just a moment. Here, for instance, and this is nothing new now. Keep in mind, we've already said this is nothing new. Here is something from 2 years ago, over 2 years ago. Obama administration considering resettling Syrian refugees in the United States. And these are the states where they may go. And it's an article about that. Now, the interesting thing is, it says the State Department is ready to reconsider the idea, an official from the department said of the administration, if the administration receives a formal request from the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. Now, this is the problem that most people kind of gloss over when they read these articles. These refugee programs are actually overseen by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees. They're the ones who decide who are eligible for inclusion into your country. Now, just as an idea, Antonio Gutierrez is the past president of the Socialist International and a hardcore Marxist. He is the head of the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. This is the guy we're going to trust? Guess who the main man in the United States that works with these people are? It's Anthony Lake, who the John Birch Society stopped from being named the head of the CIA because of his communist Marxist background. And he's the American that's going to be doing this. We don't vet these people at all. We are getting these people from the United Nations. And this article is 2 years old. But we've been looking at this for a long time, my file alone on it. And you can go through decade after decade, year after year. Here's one out of Parade magazine, from the Middle East to the Midwest. And it shows, it's an article about people coming in, these Muslims from these war-torn places, not being vetted. We have no idea of who they are. Here's another one, and this one was U.S. to help resettle more Syrian refugees. And this was a year ago. So this is not something new, ladies and gentlemen. We're just now beginning to see what's going on. And it's not just Syria. It's not just Iraq. It's not just Iran and Afghanistan and everything else. I'm getting too excited here. But you get this like out of the Times Digest, the New York Times, of over 2 years ago. It's an article on Mexican villages that have been cleaned out because they've all come into the United States. And you know that these Mexican villages used to be vibrant places full of people. They're half deserted, some of them now, because they came north. So this immigration problem is much bigger than people realize. We are allowing people to come into our country that we have no idea of their backgrounds, from war-torn areas, simply because they lost. Keep that in mind. You know, not all of the guys that lose are good guys. If this rebel beats that rebel, or this communist beats that communist, whatever, we bring them on into the United States. It is nuts. But it is only nuts if you think it's stupidity. It is design. These things are designed to break down the American society. And it's high time we force Congress to finally get some guts and stand up and do something about it. Until next week, we'll see you then.
So here's how this works into this Trojan horse of jihad under the cloak of migration. Recently, the Islamic State released a map of the areas it plans on expanding into over the next 5 years. This map includes European nations such as Portugal, Spain, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Greece, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Romania, Armenia, Georgia, Crete, Cyprus, parts of Russia. Putin understands this may be the reason that he's moving on ISIS now before it gets out of hand like it is here in America. Because have you noticed, none of the refugees are going to Muslim countries. There's no need to do that. They're already Muslim. They're migrating as part of a jihad to take over non-Muslim countries, become the majority, and invoke Sharia law. And here's the proof that migration has been a Trojan horse for Islam. Historian Arnold Toynbee authored many history books, including A Greek Policy since 1892 and The Murderous Tyranny of the Turks in 1917. Here's what he wrote, and I quote, "Turks from Central Asia ruled during the first 2 centuries of their conquest by unscrupulous sultans who subjugated the Christian populations of Asian Minor, South European Europe, compelling parts of the population to embrace Mohammedism, and supporting their own power by seizing the children of the rest, forcibly converting them to Islam, making out of them an efficient standing army by whom valor and discipline the Turkish wars of conquest were carried on from early 15th century down through the 19th century. The Greeks were leaders of civilization in the ancient world in the Middle Ages, till the Greek Empire of Constantinople was conquered by the Turks in 1453. The Armenians were the first people to make Christianity their national religion. They proclaimed a fine literature and architecture which the Turks' conquest destroyed. Turks have repressed all symptoms of Armenian revival by massacres. There are 3 stages in the history of the Ottoman tyranny. This Ottoman dominion, which started thus in the 13th century with a few square miles of territory in northwestern Asia Minor, expanded during the next 300 years till it stretched from within a few miles of Vienna to Mecca and Baghdad. It destroyed the ancient empire of Constantinople, which had preserved Greek learning during the Middle Ages. The free Christian kingdoms of Bulgaria, Serbia, Bosnia, Moldavia, and Hungary were destroyed. Toynbee described the Ottoman method of conscription was to take a tribute of children from the conquered Christians, so many children from each family every so many years, bring them into barracks as fanatical Muslims and trained them as professional recruits. They were called janissaries. These janissaries militarized from their youth up and divorced from every human relationship except loyalty to their warlord, and they were the most formidable soldiers in Europe. And each new Christian land they conquered was a new field of recruitment for their corps. The Ottoman Empire literally drained its victims' blood. And its history of this vampire state is unparalleled in the history of the world. So mass migration and the eventual majority in numbers is a practice that's been used for hundreds of years. It's one of the stages of jihad, and we're going to talk about the stages of jihad in a little bit. So how does this possibly play into end-time prophecy? And the question is this how God could make a Muslim Antichrist come out of the European Union? Let me explain that. Christianity today is full of self-proclaimed theologians. These are scholars who explain to us, the unwashed masses, how God will fill end-time prophecy, and they do it by mixing God's word and the understanding and wisdom of man, which presents some problems. God said that our ways are not his ways, that our thoughts are not his thoughts. So how does man's wisdom impact God's end-time prophecy? Well, man seems to think he's able to use the understanding of the world and man to figure out how God is going to make these things come to pass. Well, it's been my experience that when it comes to the working of God, the best advice is to expect the unexpected. And I want to talk a little bit about that today because there's something that should be flying in the face of everyone who's watching the signs of the times. That is the idea that this Antichrist will come from the European Union. And there's two different schools of thought on this. And they've been diametrically opposed to each other up to this point. So let me give you those 2 points of view and let's see if something's happening here or if it's not. Now, according to Hal Lindsey, the Antichrist will be a quote-unquote future Führer from Europe who will come to lead the European Union in its final end-time form. He will have the technology of Europe and America at his disposal to usher in his Mark of the Beast system, and also America's military might to back up his authority. Well, Hal doesn't speculate on where this false prophet comes from, but Perry Stone, however, believes the Antichrist will be someone who claims to be a Mahdi, Islam's Masonic figure, who will use the Arab gold reserves and oil to finance the world economy with a new global-backed currency after the Western economy's crash. Perry says he'll use a nuclear device to destroy Rome, Babylon the Great, and the false prophet, and Stone believes to be an apostate pope, will come from the Vatican to Jerusalem, where he will establish a world religion based on a merger of Christianity and Islam. Well, who's correct? Could it be that both of them are at least in part correct? Let me throw this into the mix. I'm not saying this is what it is, but I'm saying this is how you expect the unexpected. Why did hundreds of thousands of Muslims all decide to migrate all at once only into Europe? Not into other Muslim countries where they would be welcomed. There's been a civil war in Syria for years. Why all at once? Well, for 1,500 years of Muslim imperialistic colonist blood conquest and subjugation of others through invasion and war to the east of Arab in Iraq, Persia, and further eastward, which continues to this day, the Muslim wars of imperialist conquest have been launched for almost 1,500 years against hundreds of nations over millions of square miles, significantly larger than the British Empire at its peak. And the lust for Muslim imperialist conquest stretched from South France to the Philippines and from Austria to Nigeria, from Central Asia to New Guinea. This is the classic definition of imperialism. the policy and practice of seeking to dominate the economy and political affairs of a weaker country. Well, in history, Muslims have waged jihad as colonists to convert the world to Islam. The Muslim goal was to have a central government, first in Damascus, then in Baghdad, later in Cairo, Istanbul, and other imperial centers. Then local governors, judges, and other rulers were appointed by the central imperial authorities over these conquered colonies. Islamic law was introduced as the senior law, whether or not wanted by the local people. Arabic was introduced as the ruler's language, and the local language would almost disappear. Two classes of residents were established: the native residents, who paid the jizya tax that their Muslim rulers didn't have to pay, and in each case, these laws allowed local conquered people less freedom than was allowed to the conquering colonist rulers. Even non-Arab Muslim inhabitants in these conquered lands became second-class citizens behind the ruling Arabs. This is the classic definition of colonist: a group of people who settle in a distant territory from the state having jurisdiction control over it and who remain under the political jurisdiction of their native land. Well, Palestine was the first Western, non-Arab area invaded in the Muslim imperious colonist bloody conquest and subjugation of others. Now, at the time, Palestine was under the rule of the so-called Eastern Roman Empire, ruled from Istanbul and Greek-speaking people, and was Eastern Orthodox Catholic. And the Eastern Roman Empire was in serious decline. And let me add that a nation in decline is ripe for conquest. These Eastern Orthodox rulers were despots, and in Palestine had subjected the large population of local Jews and Christians because the Orthodox were imperialist, colonist, and bloody, and majored in religious persecution to boot. Well, the Muslim imperialist colonists waged a bloody conquest, subjugated Palestinians, then Egypt, because Orthodox weakness and the relative speed of conquest of Palestine and Istanbul. You often see this Muslim imperialist conquest described by Muslim and PC writers as peaceful and bloodless, but this statement is simply not true. Migration is part of the doctrine of jihad. Migration is so important to Islamic leaders, it's based on the Hijra, Muhammad's immigration from Mecca to Medina. And why? Because it was migration that led to the creation of jihad in Medina. And it was jihad that made Islam triumphant. In the past, Muslims tend to stay in Islamic countries. Today, the new politics is to migrate to Kafir lands, those are non-believers, and immerse themselves in local politics. This is the jihad of money, writing, and speech. The politics is to bring the Sharia to Kafir cultures, unbelieving cultures. An example is using Islamic money is to build departments in universities that will support Sharia and never criticize Islam. Does that sound familiar? You can't criticize Islam? I have a clip here that I want you to listen to. This is Bill Warner, and he explains a little bit about migration as jihad.
If you're keeping up with the news at all, you know there is a massive migration happening from the Islamic world into Europe and the United States, for that matter, through the refugee program. Now, we usually see migration being driven by politics and poverty, but there's another driver here, which is the doctrine of jihad in Islam. How does this work? Well, let's start with timekeeping and the calendar. In Islam, they don't use the same calendar we do. They use when they mark a year, it has AH after it, in the year of the Hijra. Migration. And why do they do this? Well, you see, it's very simple. You would think that Islamic calendar would start with the birth of Muhammad or the date of the revelation of the Quran, but no. Instead, the Islamic calendar starts with what brought it success, migration. You see, Muhammad preached the religion of Islam for 13 years in Mecca and persuaded 150 Arabs to become Muslim. Not a very high success rate. When he was driven out of Mecca and went to Medina, he became a jihadist and a warlord, and this brought him enormous success. After 10 years of being in Medina, practicing the art of jihad, he was ruler of all of Arabia, and every Arab in Arabia was a Muslim. You see, it was migration which led to the success of Islam, and therefore that's the reason the calendar is keyed to migration, because that's what brought it success. Now, in the past, Muslims didn't migrate much. They stayed in Islamic lands. But today, through the pressure of population growth and poverty, they're leaving, and of course, war. We help to destabilize the governments, and so therefore they're coming to those who actually destabilized their governments. It used to be that Muslims were supposed to stay in Islamic lands because that's where they could fully practice their Islam, where the Sharia ruled. But now then they're coming to America, and a new twist has been put on the migration doctrine. You can come to the land of the kafir, the non-Muslim, but you must, as much as possible, live in Muslim enclaves and obey as much of the Sharia as possible. Now, in the past, there was one argument that Muslims should not take any part of the Jahiliyyah doctrine, ignorant doctrine of the kafir, and to stay totally outside, to build a wall around the ghetto. But the Muslim Brotherhood has advocated a new argument. No, the immigrants are to start taking over the process of politics, stay in enclaves as much as they can, and then enter into politics where they start to influence the schools, laws, civil rights laws, halal food, and other such things. What they're doing here is practicing the jihad of the dollars and the jihad of the pen and the jihad of speech. That is, they're persuading Americans that, you know, Islam is just the best thing of all. So they're quite political in their arguments and their presence in front of our legislatures. Let me point out this something so that it'll be clear to you. There are many, many Buddhist immigrants who've come to America. What was the last time you saw a rally where they were protesting for Buddhist rights? What was the last time the Buddhists had advocates or lobbyists in the legislature? They don't at all. You see, all of this, always the pressure we're having on our civil rights and all other aspects of how to live in America from the Muslims, this is all part of jihad. Jihad of the pen and jihad of speech and jihad of money. Jihad of money, as an example, is setting up centers within universities which strictly mouth the position of the Sharia. Now, the part of life that they cannot lead as a pure Muslim in America or Europe is covered by a principle in Sharia law. The necessity overcomes obligation. If you're supposed to do something as a Muslim, but you cannot because you're living in a kafir land, then it is okay, because the necessity of living is more important than a Sharia rule. So remember this as well. Under jihad, any rule of the Sharia can be broken. So, what we think of as politics and poverty has a new driver in American, and that is the politics of jihad, migration as jihad. We're going to see a lot more of it. What are we going to do? Do we want to sustain our civilization? Then how are we going to deal with this problem? And why do we keep bringing in more and more of it? Think about all this. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take a short break here, but when we come back, I'm going to report what the European news agencies are saying about this. We'll hear from David Woods, who will explain the 3 stages of jihad. You don't want to miss this. We'll be right back.
You're listening to a global pioneer in the new mainstream media. End Time News with W. Dean Shook. Your connection to the signs of the times. We have assumed control. We have assumed control. We have assumed control.
GoDaddy offers everything you need to make a name for yourself on the web, from domain names and website builders to complete e-commerce solutions. We've earned our place as the world's #1 accredited domain registrar by delivering world-class products at competitive prices and support them with industry-best services delivered 24/7, 365. We're proud to serve our customers from locations around the world. Sign up now at wdeanshook.com and get your domain name as low as $5.99 a year. Sign up now at wdeanshook.com. Go, Daddy. Go, Daddy. Hi, folks. Have you noticed the federal government and police departments are using drones for everything? Drones are expensive. They're hard to fly. It can take up to a week just to learn to make a drone hover. Not anymore. There's a new generation of drones that are not only affordable, but very easy to fly. Now, you can have your own personal drone, anything from a micro mini that'll fit in the palm of your hand, right up to a full-scale model, 10 inches in diameter like the model I have, the V949 Pro. Comes with a 6-axis, 4-rotor blade and an HD 2.4 camera mounted on the bottom. These drones are made of a space-age polymer. They're durable. And don't worry about crashing your drone. Replacement blades for this drone from the website are only $1.80 for a pack of 4. That's right, I said $1.80 for a pack of 4 replacement blades. You can also get an extra long life battery. This battery allows you up to a half-hour of flight time with a maximum speed of 40 miles an hour. Have your own personal drone, and you can get all of this for under $70. If you go to the website, wdeanshook.com, and click on the banner on the webpage, you can get from 7 to 22% off your personal drone. It's shipped as a kit. You can be up and flying your own personal drone with an HD camera within a half hour. Come to the webpage, wdeanshook.com. Click on that banner and get your discount today. wdeanshook.com.
Something else that Muslim immigration appears to have brought to Norway is what some here call a rape epidemic. Recent police statistics showed that in the capital of Oslo, 100% of assault rapes between strangers were committed by immigrant non-Western males, and 9 out of 10 of their victims were native Norwegian women. Some blonde Norwegian women have reportedly begun dyeing their hair black, and many travel only in groups. Kristen Spitsnogel is a therapist who has counseled some of the rape victims, and she's been attacked in the Norwegian media for saying what many will not, that the rape problem is primarily Muslim men raping non-Muslim women, and any woman who does not dress modestly and wear the Muslim headscarf could be considered by some Muslim men as fair game.
For them, I think the hijab is a symbolic marker which separates the submissive, proper Muslim women from what they see as the Norwegian horse. But when I say horse, I'm really just referring to their own words. This is what they told the journalists.
Spitsnogel says Norway's left-wing establishment has been blaming the victims, because the whole notion that Islamic culture is dangerous to women is very politically incorrect here. Hannah Herland is author of the best-selling book Alarm, Thoughts on a Culture in Crisis.
Not all values from Islamic countries or cultures are excellent to bring into the European society. And I think many times the Norwegians fear to speak about that in fear of being called a racist.
Do you think the media is biased? Maybe they're leaving something out, or there's something they're not telling you. Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. W. Dean Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
The Daily Mail is reporting a furious Muslim parent taunted the New Jersey school board over religious holiday closure and says we're going to be the majority soon. Muslim families had wanted New Jersey City schools to shut down on September 24th in observance of Eid al-Adha. After initially improving the move, the state school board voted to keep the school open so as not to disrupt the lives of non-Muslim families. Several Muslim parents who attended the meeting screaming in rage. One woman in a purple headscarf told the board, "We're no longer the minority. That's clear from tonight. We're going to be the majority soon." I guess she just let that slip. But because when Muslims become the majority, they'll force Sharia law on every institution, government entity, and community in America. Our freedom will be gone. Do you think I'm kidding? Truth in Action puts it very well when they say this. Obama is now openly, through the State Department, bringing thousands of Muslims from Syria every month and has already imported hundreds of thousands in an effort to build that civilian army he promised to create. Did you really think he would build this army out of Americans? To add insult to injury, our government permits dozens of terrorist training camps to exist right here in our borders. It tells us just now how infiltrated we are as a nation that this is permitted. But long before Obama ever committed to these treasonous acts in front of everyone, he was flying Muslims in by the thousands. How many did he bring in these private flights? We really have no idea exactly how many jihadists exist inside our country, not only because of his clandestine tactics, but because Obama has completely opened up our southern border, allowing terrorists to flood in with illegals by the tens of thousands. Obama even gave free bus tickets to these terrorists. One would assume in a prearranged plan to place his terrorists as a strategic locations. The idea that America has better assimilated its Muslims than the UK and Europe is ridiculous on its face. It's a matter of numbers. The only difference between the US, France, the UK, and the rest of the doomed continent is that they began importing Muslims decades earlier than we did. We are on the same path here in America. The number of immigrants into the United States jumped 3% in 3 years to a record 41.3 million in 2013. And that the nearly 300,000 who came from Muslim countries pose a major national security threat. Refugee, resettlement, religious visa, diversity visas. The Obama administration uses all of these to get around any limitations or stopgaps against any dangerous immigration. The concept of immigration jihad goes all the way back to Muhammad as a means of supplanting the native population and reaching the position of power is a tenet of Islamic imperialism. The concept of Muslim immigration began with Islam's prophet. Soon after Muhammad arrived in Medina, together with his close friend, his father, and his wife, they were joined by a ring of other friends and followers known as in Islamic history as companions. They formed in Medina the first body of Muslim immigrants in history and very soon changed the face of Medina, making it the city of the victorious Islam. Through immigration transformed Muslims from weak and scattered groups of individuals loyal to their religious leader into a consolidated army, when a united community, and finally into a religious political state. If Muhammad and his group had never migrated in 1622, there would never have been an Islamic socialist economic and political expansion. They did it through immigration. Muslims learned and remembered this lesson. And since then, the concept of immigration as a means of supplanting the native population, reaching the position of power, has become a well-developed doctrine in Islam. Immigration in Islam is not a Western liberal romance, but how the newcomers gratefully search for opportunities for a better life in liberty and offer their talents and loyalty to the benefit of their new homeland. Immigration as Islam is an instrument of Islamic expansion that employs religious and ethnic separatism in order to gain special status and privilege. Then they subvert, subdue, and subjugate non-Muslim societies and pave the way for their total Islamization and implementation of Sharia's law. The main principle for a Muslim community in a non-Muslim country is that it must be separate and distinct. Already in the Charter of Medina, Muhammad outlined the basic rules for Muslims who migrate to non-Muslim lands. He says they must form a separate body, keeping their own laws and making the host country comply with them. Muslims from the beginning made it clear they were going to live by their own laws, and they're proving it every day in every nation that they invade. And Muhammad's teachings forbid Muslims to migrate to non-Muslim countries if they pursue the goal of their own personal gain or pleasure. But if they migrate with the ultimate goal of spreading Islam and making it victorious, or at least this is part of the reason for their migration, then they're allowed to both pleasure and personal gain. A Muslim immigrant should not integrate with its host society. But if his stay depends on showing some kind of integration into the host non-Muslim society, then he's permitted to demonstrate a fake integration, only in appearance and only temporarily, until the goal of subduing and the Islamization of that host society is achieved. This is why all of those discussions so popular among Western liberals about which method is best for integration into religious Muslim migrants into the host and non-Muslim societies are not futile. They're amusing, like disputes about the best way to make a tiger a vegetarian. The next rule Muhammad made very clear was that immigration for Muslims is a religious duty. The reason is simple and evident. The more Muslims come to a non-Muslim country, the more possibilities this will open for infiltration into all structures of the country with the final goal of securing victory for Islam. And more soldiers will stand up when the time of jihad comes. Immigration is a preparatory stage to jihad, and Muhammad made it very clear when he said this, and I quote, "I charge you with 5 of what Allah has charged me with, to assume, to listen, to obey, to migrate, and to wage jihad for the sake of Allah." How much more clear could that be? The religious duty of migration was stated in numerous Quranic surahs. They all started with the same words. Those who believe and immigrate and strove hard and fought in Allah's cause. Immigration goes as a stepping stone for jihad. Where you cannot establish Islam by force is where immigration enters. And in practice, it looks like that. Islam in Egypt, Palestine, and Persia was spread by the sword. But many other countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Central Asia, some parts of India, were gained through migration, not by the sword. Immigration is Islam is merely a disguise for conquest, and we know this from a solid history of Muslim conquest. And if you think that this disguised conquest ended, then you're fatally wrong. Immigration ends only when Islam achieves its goal of conquering the world, and Muhammad again stated this very clearly. Here's what he said. Migration cannot be ended as long as the kafir, the unbelievers, or as long as there are enemies that resist. So as long as there's unbelievers or enemies, migration cannot stop. Later, Muhammad developed this idea. Here's what he said. Migration will continue until the sun rises from the west, and it will not be stopped until repentance is cut off, and repentance may not be cut off until the sun rises from the west. So immigration can end only when a community or a country has been won over. The conquest has been achieved, but jihad does not end until all the world is Islamic, and Muslims should not stop until Islam dominates the world. Now, just as Muhammad formulated it, there can be no migration after the conquest, but jihad and a desire or an intention, and if you settle, then spread out. From the start, Muhammad brushed aside the Christian postulate about separation of church and state. In the Islamic community, the church is the state. The most important result of migration was the expansion of Islam outside its initial borders, not only as a religion, but as a religious and political system. Muslim immigration is a translation period of preparation for transforming the host society from an open society into an Islamic society or the slaves of Allah, and establishing a political system, a state, based on Islamic principles. So when Islam demands submission and countries cave to their demands, that submission to their religion by giving them special prayer rooms or allowing any special or recognition of their faith is an act of surrender. That means Islam has dominated you and you are now a slave to Islam. You have surrendered. So the Daily Mail is saying Germany in a state of siege. Merkel was cheered when she opened the floodgates to migrants. Now, with gangs of men roaming the streets and young German women being told to cover up, the mood is changing. On the busy shopping street in Gießen, a German university town, twinned with Winchester, migrant Atif Zahour tucks into a chicken dish with his brother and cousin in the curry restaurant Chili to Go. They've left jobs back in Karachi, Pakistan, and now want to be Europeans. Well, in late July, the three slipped into Germany with their wives and children using illegal documents. They lived together in a 5-bedroom house rented for them by the Chancellor Angela Merkel's government, a 40-minute drive away from Gießen, which is home to the biggest migrant camp in the country. Said we paid a trafficking agent for false visas to fly here to Germany, says 34-year-old Atif, which claimed asylum and came to Gießen camp with other migrants 3 weeks ago because we had families. They gave us a proper home. Well, Atif is well-dressed and speaks fluent English. He used to be a transport manager at Karachi Airport and is from a well-to-do family. Between mouthfuls of curry, he added, but there's violence between political gangs in Karachi. Lots of people are leaving for Europe. The trafficker decided that Germany was the place for us because it was welcoming refugees. Yet the raw truth is that Atif is not fleeing war or persecution. He's one of the thousands of economic migrants getting into Germany as the EU's immigration crisis grows bigger every day. This week, David Cameron said Europe must send failed asylum claimants back to their own countries, while the European Council President Donald Tusk has warned that 1 million more migrants are on their way and that the policy of open doors and windows must be stopped. These are tough words, but it's action that's needed, as Jens Spahn, a deputy minister in Chancellor Merkel's government, said this week. Not everyone can stay in Germany or in Europe. If people are coming for poverty reasons, we have to send them back. Mrs. Merkel's offered last month to accept all refugees from war-ravaged Syria, and she opened the floodgates. More than 1 million migrants are expected this year alone. The bulk of them from genuine asylum seekers. There's now deepening disquiet in this Christian country, dotted with churches that's being overwhelmed by people of a different religion and culture. Well, Breitbart is also reporting the UN chief migrant flood is just the beginning. We need to close the doors and the windows. As the migrant flood continues to rock the very foundation of the European Union, the heads of state and government and the member states gathered at a formal crisis meeting in Brussels to discuss what they can do and what must be done. They said tonight our discussion was based on fact, not emotions, according to Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council and former prime minister of Poland, told reporters following the meeting there are 8 million displaced people in Syria, while about 4 million have fled to Syria's neighbors. We should be talking about millions of potential refugees trying to reach Europe from Syria alone, not to mention Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places, he said. So far, only about 2% of Syria's refugees have made it to Europe. They figure it's likely to rise significantly following Germany's recent announcement that all Syrians who make it to their borders will be allowed to stay. Tusk continued. He said, recently, I visited refugee camps in Turkey and Jordan, and I heard only one message. We are determined to get to Europe. It's clear that the biggest tide of refugees and migrants are yet to come. Therefore, we need to correct the policy of open doors and windows. Now the focus should be on the proper protection of our external borders and an external assistance to refugees of the countries in our neighborhoods. Despite the rhetoric, however, the heads of state agree to little other than to throw more taxpayer money at the situation. So that brings up the question, is this a Trojan horse for jihad? Well, a lot of people have a lot of heated discussion about Islam, saying that there is a moderate Islam, a peaceful Islam, and a radical Islam. Well, I have a clip here from David Wood that's going to explain why none of these are moderate or peaceful. Listen to this clip from David Wood.
Islam can be a little confusing. You meet a Muslim at the grocery store, nicest person in the world, cute kids, loves America. Later that day, you turn on your television and wait a minute, some other Muslim just blew up the grocery store. What's going on here? Who represents Islam? The peaceful Muslim buying tomatoes or the violent Muslim bombing tomatoes? You'd like an answer, so you open up the Quran. You read Surah 2, 256. There is no compulsion in religion. That sounds peaceful and tolerant. I guess the peaceful Muslims are the true followers of Islam. Then you go to Surah 929, fight those who do not believe in Allah. That's not nice. Now it seems like the violent Muslims got it right. The evidence points in different directions, so what are you supposed to believe?
Partnership between America and Islam must be based on what Islam is, not what it isn't.
If you've ever wondered why there are both peaceful and violent passages in the Quran, if it's ever bothered you that Muslims demand religious tolerance in the West while Christians and Jews can't build churches or synagogues in Saudi Arabia, if you've never quite grasped why organizations like CARE or ISNA claim that Islam is a religion of peace while they support terrorism behind the scenes, you can't understand Islam in the world today without understanding one essential fact. Jihad proceeds in stages. As the tiny tadpole grows into the bellowing bullfrog, as the lowly acorn becomes the mighty oak, as adorable Parent Trap Lindsay Lohan transforms into whatever she is now, so also the tolerant toddler of peaceful Islam eventually goes through puberty. That's when we all find out what full-grown, Jew-hating, church-burning, wife-beating, apostate-killing, Allahu Akbar yelling Islam is really like in all its blood-spattered glory. Whether you look at the life of Muhammad, or the early Muslim community, or the Quran, or the Hadith, or the Sirah literature, or classical Muslim commentaries, or modern Muslim scholarship, or the spread of Islam in the world today, you will find the exact same pattern. There are 3 stages in the call to jihad, depending on the status of Muslims in a society. And if you understand these 3 stages, you'll understand Islam, 14 centuries of Islamic history, and the situation we're in right now.
Partnership between America and Islam must be based on what Islam is, not what it isn't.
Stage 1. Stealth jihad. When Muslims are completely outnumbered and can't possibly win a physical confrontation with unbelievers, they're commanded to promote peace with non-Muslims and to preach a message of tolerance. For instance, when Muhammad and his followers were a persecuted minority in Mecca, they criticized the beliefs of the polytheists, but they did so peacefully. The revelations Muhammad received during this time proclaimed a future judgment for unbelievers. Allah will one day punish those who reject Muhammad. But in the meantime, to each his own. Live and let live. Coexist. A characteristic chapter from this period is Surah 109.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
Say, O unbelievers, I do not serve that which you serve, nor do you serve him whom I serve, nor am I going to serve that which you serve, nor are you going to serve him whom I serve. You shall have your religion, and I shall have my religion. Muslims in the West point to passages like this as evidence that Islam is inherently peaceful. But we know from Muslim sources that while Muhammad was calling for religious tolerance in Mecca, he was already planning to conquer the world in the name of Allah. He even tried to lure pagans to Islam by promising them victory over the non-Arabs. Let's look at a passage. One day, some of Muhammad's tribesmen went to his uncle Abu Talib because they wanted to arrange a truce with Muhammad. They wanted Muhammad to stop criticizing their beliefs. Watch what happens. Abu Talib sent for the messenger of Allah, and when he came in, he said, Nephew, here are the sheikhs and nobles of your tribe. They have asked for justice against you, that you should desist from reviling their gods, and they will leave you to your God. Uncle, he said, shall I not summon them to something which is better for them than their gods? What do you summon them to? He asked. He replied, I summon them to utter a saying through which the Arabs will submit to them, and they will rule over the non-Arabs. Abu Jahl said from among the gathering, What is it, by your father? We will give you it and 10 like it. He answered, that you should say, there is no deity but Allah. Think about this for a moment. Muhammad's walking around Mecca calling for peace and tolerance. But behind closed doors, he tells the Quraysh, join me and we'll rule over the non-Arabs, Christians, Jews, Persians, etc. These groups aren't attacking Muhammad at all, and he's already planning to conquer them. What does he need in order to subjugate the non-Muslims? He needs an army. And so he asks his tribe to convert to Islam. Now, how many times have we seen Muslim groups in the world today calling for tolerance in public, but saying something very different in private? Goes back to Muhammad. One of the key features of stage 1 is taqiyya, concealing Islam's true intentions in order to protect the Muslim community. This was eventually made explicit in Surah 3:28.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
"Let not the believers take disbelievers for their friends in preference to believers. Whoso doeth that hath no connection with Allah, unless it be that ye but guard yourselves against them," taking, as it were, security. Muslims aren't allowed to be friends with non-Muslims unless they're outnumbered and they feel like they're in danger from a stronger adversary. That's when Muslims are told to pretend to be friendly. One of Islam's greatest scholars, Ibn Kathir, comments, "In this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship outwardly, but never inwardly." Abu Darda, one of Muhammad's companions, put it this way, "We smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them."
Assalamu alaikum.
Another key feature of stage 1 is victim status. Muslims like to pretend that Muhammad and his followers were persecuted in Mecca simply because they were Muslims. Total nonsense. They were persecuted for antagonizing the Meccans by mocking their beliefs. We read in At-Tabari, "The Messenger of Allah proclaimed Allah's message openly and declared Islam publicly to his fellow tribesmen. When he did so, they did not withdraw from him or reject him in any way until he spoke of their gods and denounced them. When he did this, they took exception to it and united in opposition and hostility to him, except for those of them whom Allah had protected from error by means of Islam." Notice that the pagans of Mecca had no problem with Muhammad preaching Islam. They became angry when he began attacking their beliefs, and they had to put up with quite a bit. Listen to this description of what the pagans went through in their own words. "We have never seen the like of what we have endured from this man. He has derided our traditional values, abused our forefathers, reviled our religion, caused division among us, and insulted our gods. We have endured a great deal from him."
Assalamu alaikum.
Muhammad was condemning their beliefs and their values. He was causing division in the city. Not too extreme from a Western perspective. What's interesting is that when the people of Mecca responded in kind and mocked Islam, Muslims said, "Oh, they're persecuting us. What evil people attacking us because of our beliefs." Double standards. One of the goals of the stealth jihad stage is to give Islam a privileged status above other religions. But Muhammad's constant antagonism towards the Meccans did lead to actual persecution. And this persecution of the early Muslim community was the best thing that ever happened to Islam. When people heard that poor, defenseless Muslims were being mistreated, they rushed to Muhammad's aid. The Christians of Abyssinia, the Jews of Medina, and various pagan groups all agreed at one time or another to protect Muslims from the mean, bigoted Islamophobes in Mecca. Now keep in mind, Muhammad was already planning to conquer all of these people. But they didn't know that. All they knew was that Muslims were being persecuted and they wanted to help. Once Muhammad and his followers had formed enough alliances and were no longer at the mercy of the Meccans, the message of the Quran suddenly changed.
Partnership between America and Islam must be based on what Islam is, not what it isn't.
Stage 2. Defensive jihad. When there are enough Muslims and resources to defend the Islamic community from attacks, persecution, or criticism, Muslims are called to engage in defensive jihad, fighting unbelievers who pose a physical or intellectual threat to Islam. After the city of Yathrib, now called Medina, agreed to protect the Muslim community, Muhammad and his followers left Mecca, and they were given permission to fight. Surah 22, 39 to 40.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
permission to fight is given to those upon whom war is made because they are oppressed, and most surely Allah is well able to assist them, those who have been expelled from their homes without a just cause, except that they say, "Our Lord is Allah." Did you catch that? According to the Quran, Muslims were kicked out of Mecca simply because they believed in Allah. We've already seen that the Meccans had no problem with Muslims believing in Allah, or even with Muslims preaching Islam. They had a problem with Muhammad mocking their religion and causing division in their city. But again, Muslims needed victim status for their protection, so I guess Allah decided to fudge history just a little.
And throughout history, Islam has demonstrated through words and deeds the possibilities of religious tolerance and racial equality.
Now that Muhammad had several non-Muslim groups ready to defend him, he turned to the primary tactic of stage 2, terrorism. The people of Mecca depended on the caravan trade for their survival. Anyone who had money would invest it, hoping to get back something extra to feed their families. If a caravan was robbed or didn't return, children might starve. So instead of living a peaceful life in Medina, Muhammad started attacking the Meccan caravans. Muslims launched 7 attacks against the caravans, and the Meccans never retaliated. During the 7th attack, Muslims killed a man, and they took the goods and some captives as well. The problem was that it was still the holy month when everyone agreed not to fight. Muhammad was a bit worried about this at first, but then he received Surah 2:17.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
"They question thee, O Muhammad, with regard to warfare in the sacred month. Say, warfare therein is a great transgression, but to turn men from the way of Allah, and to disbelieve in Him and in the inviolable place of worship, and to expel His people thence, is a greater transgression with Allah, for persecution is worse than killing." Persecution is worse than killing. Yes, we killed a man during the holy month when there was a universal agreement not to fight, but you persecuted us, and that's worse. So don't you dare judge us. The Meccans had been trying to avoid war, but it was clear that the Muslims weren't going to stop attacking the caravans, and that Meccan trade and the livelihood of the city would never be safe. So the pagan tribes sent an army to protect the next caravan. Muslims attacked and defeated the Meccans at what became known as the Battle of Badr. Notice that the first real battle between Muslims and non-Muslims was a result of non-Muslims trying to protect themselves from Muslims terrorizing their trade routes.
Islam has a proud tradition of tolerance.
It didn't take long for Muhammad's protectors to realize that they had been duped. Muslims weren't quite the innocent victims they had claimed to be. Muhammad and his followers were far more greedy and violent than the pagans they were now attacking. But these disillusioned defenders soon learned that once you agree to support Muhammad, you don't get to change your mind. Anything other than perfect allegiance to Muhammad becomes grounds for expulsion, seizing property, enslavement, or annihilation. 3 Jewish tribes in Medina found that out the hard way.
A proud tradition of tolerance.
Non-Muslims also learned that no matter how much they disagreed with Muhammad's campaign of violence and intimidation, they had to keep their mouths shut. Muhammad began ordering the assassination of critics during stage 2. People who spoke out against Islam or wrote poems about Muhammad were brutally murdered. And the citizens of Medina, the very people who had invited Muslims into their city, saw their rights rapidly disappearing in the name of Allah.
Tolerance, tolerance, tolerance.
Stage 2, then, is characterized by defensive fighting those who attack the Muslim community in some way. What we need to get our minds around, however, is that Muslims have a much broader definition of what constitutes an attack than anything we're familiar with. Persecution and military aggression certainly count as attacks, but as we've seen, criticizing Islam counts as an attack. Backing out of alliances after you figure out Muhammad's true intentions counts as an attack. And in the defensive jihad stage, Muslims are ordered to respond to these attacks with physical violence and terrorism.
Partnership between America and Islam must be based on what Islam is, not what it isn't.
Stage 3, offensive jihad. When Muslims establish a majority and achieve political power in an area, they are commanded to begin offensive jihad. Once Mecca and Arabia were under Muhammad's control, the message of the Quran changed yet again. Suddenly, Muslims weren't just told to fight against aggressors. They were commanded to fight non-Muslims simply for being non-Muslims.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be unyielding to them. Surely Allah has bought of the believers their persons and their property for this, that they shall have the garden. They fight in Allah's way, so they slay and are slain. O you who believe, fight those of the unbelievers who are near to you, and let them find in you hardness.
Tolerance, tolerance, tolerance.
If Muslims have the military strength to expand their political power and to violently subjugate non-Muslim populations, forcing these non-Muslims to pay tribute, the Quran commands them to do so. Surah 9:29.
As the Holy Quran tells us,
"Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued." This verse doesn't order Muslims to fight oppressors or even critics. It orders Muslims to fight those who don't believe in Allah.
tolerance,
tolerance, tolerance, tolerance, tolerance, tolerance.
We find similar teachings in Islam's most trusted collections of ahadith. Sahih al-Bukhari 6924. Muhammad said, "I've been ordered to fight the people till they say, La ilaha illallah. None has the right to be worshipped but Allah, and whoever said, La ilaha illallah, Allah will save his property and his life from me."
Tolerance, religious tolerance, tolerance, religious tolerance.
Sahih Muslim, number 30. Muhammad said, "I've been commanded to fight against people so long as they do not declare that there is no God but Allah." Muhammad didn't say, "I've been commanded to fight people until they stop persecuting us." That would be stage 2. It's stage 3. And the same guy who complained just a few years earlier that people were persecuting him because of his beliefs now says he's been commanded to fight people based on what they believe. Total hypocrisy.
Religious tolerance, religious tolerance, religious tolerance.
In the offensive jihad stage, Muslims can also expel Christians and Jews from lands they've been living in for centuries in order to keep certain areas that are important to the Muslim community pure. Areas such as Arabia. In Sahih Muslim 4366, Muhammad says, "I will expel the Jews and Christians from the Arabian Peninsula and will not leave any but Muslims." He won't leave anyone but Muslims. Is this a man who promoted religious diversity and tolerance? Only when he was in the minority. As soon as Muslims had control of the government, diversity and tolerance went out the window, along with the Jews and Christians.
We will convey our deep appreciation for the Islamic faith, which has done so much over the centuries to shape the world.
So this is the pattern that's been laid down for Muslims by their prophet. Stage 1, stealth jihad. When Muslims are too weak to fight, they promote peace and tolerance outwardly but never inwardly. They practice taqiyya, they prepare for jihad behind the scenes, they claim victim status, and they seek special privileges for Islam. Stage 2, defensive jihad. When Muslims are strong enough to fight, but not strong enough to subjugate the unbelievers, they terrorize their enemies, murder critics, and look for excuses to attack other groups. Stage 3, offensive jihad. When Muslims are in the majority, they violently subjugate all non-Muslims, they strive to expand their political dominion, and they rid important Muslim lands of all non-Muslims. This is the pattern we find in the Quran, in the Hadith, and in the Muslim commentaries.
Assalamu alaikum.
Now, look around the world and tell me what you see. Saudi Arabia, what stage are they in? Stage 3, obviously. Massive Muslim majority. Lo and behold, if you're not a Muslim, you can't preach, you can't build a place of worship, you can't even set foot in the city of Mecca. Exactly what we would expect based on the Muslim sources. Certain places in Africa, and I'd say some areas of Europe, are in stage 2. Muslims have enough fighters and resources and alliances to fight defensively. And what do? We see terrorism. We see churches being burned to the ground or blown up in Nigeria and Ethiopia. We see no-go zones forming and critics of Islam being killed, even in Europe. Again, exactly what we would expect based on the Muslim sources. Here in America, where Muslims form a small minority of the population, what stage are we in? Stage 1. What's Islam all about, according to American Muslims? It's all about peace and tolerance. Muslims just want to be like everyone else, but racist hate mongers are attacking them because of their beliefs. That's why we should all be thankful that the government and Christians and Jews are stepping in to defend Muslims from bigots and Islamophobes, just as governments and Christians and Jews stepped in to defend Muslims during the time of Muhammad.
And I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they appear.
My friends, how difficult is this to figure out? What have we discussed that a 6-year-old couldn't understand? Muslims have been using the same playbook for 14 centuries. It's in all their sources. It's as plain as day. And yet our leaders and the media just can't understand why Christians and Jews are second-class citizens in the Muslim world, or why Muslims in Europe are ready to kill over cartoons, or why Muslims in America are so desperate for victim status they'll cry discrimination when a home improvement store doesn't pay for advertising on one of the most boring shows ever. It's all right here. If someone can't understand this, I'd say he doesn't want to understand it. But we've reached a point in history when we can no longer afford to be willfully stupid. If our leaders are incapable of grasping the 3-step strategy of jihadists, they have no business leading a marching band, let alone a Western nation. Unfortunately, Muslims have been so successful in their Stage 1 operations, they've convinced our leaders and the media that the only information we need when it comes to Islam is what's handed to us by terrorist-linked Muslim organizations like CARE.
Bin Laden was not a Muslim leader.
We're officially on our own. If we want to popularize this information, we'll have to do it ourselves. Sending this video to everyone you know would be a good start. I also think someone needs to put this material into a pamphlet so we can all pass out copies. Oh, what's this? It's a double-sided pamphlet discussing the 3 stages of jihad. It seems I've already done most of the work for you. All you need to do is go to my blog, answeringmuslims.com, click on the Jihad tab at the top, and open the 3 stages of jihad PDF pamphlet file. You can print this out, fold it up, and give it to those who need to know about jihad, which is pretty much everyone. Islam's greatest ally in the West is ignorance. Jihadists can't subjugate us through physical force, so they're doing their best to subjugate our minds. The ultimate obstacle to global jihad, then, is an informed population of free people. Wouldn't you like to be an obstacle to jihad in Sharia? I know I would. In 2012, let's make a special, freedom-sized effort to educate ourselves and others about the inner workings of the jihadist machine. And let us call our project Operation Monkey Wrench. I think it's important to add a quick appendix on westernized Muslims. I've said in this video that Muslims in Stage 1 are commanded to deceive non-Muslims in order to keep us ignorant of Islam's violent goals. But if you present this information to your Muslim friends, they're going to deny it. Now, does this mean they're practicing taqiyya? No. When your Muslim friends tell you that Islam is a religion of peace, are they trying to trick you? Probably not. Most Muslims in America have been influenced by Western values more than they've been influenced by Islam. They may pray 5 times a day or fast during Ramadan, but their knowledge of Islam doesn't get much deeper than that. They've read very little of what's in their sources, and they know practically nothing about what we've discussed in this video. So, chances are, when your Muslim friends tell you that Islam is peaceful, they really believe it. No need to accuse them of lying. Sadly, your westernized Muslim friends aren't a source of Islamic doctrine. Islamic doctrine is grounded in the Quran and the Sunnah of Muhammad, and these sources are perfectly clear when it comes to jihad. So I think we need to add another stage to our 3 stages. Stage 0, the totally clueless about jihad stage.
So when they move into these countries, including our own, and reproduce to the point where they have dominance, start moving into our government, then here's a story for all women, mothers, and fathers. If you defend Islam having their way in America, here's what you can expect. Now, listen up, ladies. This is out of the UK. More than 1,000 female genital mutilation cases in just 3 months, according to Jihad Watch. More than 1,000 cases of female genital mutilation, FGM, were recorded in just 3 months in the UK. For the quarter April to June this year, there were 1,036 newly recorded cases of FGM in England, with a total of 1,159 attendances for FGM, according to the Press Association. 9 of the individuals were under the age of 18 when they were first seen. The data from the Health and Social Care Information Center said the shocking figures have made public after the health service began recording instances of female genital mutilation for the first time. Much of the FGM reported may be historic, as the abuse is normally carried out only in infants and young teenagers. Well, the NHS data did not specify whether it was carried out in the UK or abroad, as is the case in many mutilation cases. Tanya Barron, Chief Executive of Global Children's Charity Plan UK, which works to combat female genital mutilation worldwide, said it's shocking to see the extent of FGM here in the UK. We've seen hugely increased numbers in the population in the past few years. We're now waking up to the scale of this terrible practice. What we must always keep in mind, though, is this is not specifically a British problem. Female genital mutilation is a practice with an inherently global dimension. And while it's vital that we do everything we can to stop it here in the UK, as well as support the girls and women affected by it, the reality is this practice won't end in the UK until it's ended worldwide. Female genital mutilation is illegal in the UK. And it's also illegal to take a female abroad for the process. The maximum jail term for carrying out or enabling an FGM is 14 years. According to the World Health Organization, female genital mutilation is carried out for social and religious reasons, and it's an extreme form of discrimination against women. Babies born to women who have undergone female genital mutilation suffer a high rate of death compared to those who are born to women who have not undergone the procedure. Women with female genital mutilation also have increased risk of stillbirth and infants that need resuscitation and low birth rates. An estimated, listen to this, 130 million women and girls around the world are thought to be living with FGM. An International Day of Zero Tolerance of FGM took place earlier this year, with a number of measures including an outline to help end this horrifying practice. But this is a tenet of Islam. When Islam comes into authority, this is what they're going to do to everyone. They currently do it, no matter what country they're in, to their own people. Well, listen, ladies, whether you're in the UK, anywhere else in Europe, Australia, or in America, if they get control, this is what you're looking at. Sharia law in America reports it this way. Sharia law in the United States of America has reached spread of Islam phase 3 as a number of court cases that involve conflicts between civil law and Sharia law arise in America. Majority of American states have introduced bills banning courts from accommodating Sharia law. But those bills have been stalled by well-financed challenges in courts by Muslim groups that also campaign politicians who sponsor and or support these kind of bills. Oklahoma's law banning Sharia law from courts has been struck down, and only 7 other conservative states, Louisiana, Arizona, North Carolina, South Dakota, Kansas, Alabama, have been able to pass Sharia law limiting legislation, and only after watering them down to the point that they have to say the word Sharia, because under Sharia law, female genital mutilation is allowed. And while defending the status quo in legislatures, Sharia law has been advancing in other American institutions, including the following. Listen up. An increased number of public American schools with Muslim students are holding Islamic prayers toward Mecca, while public American universities continue to build Muslim-only washing facilities. In 2013, Skokie School District 68 in Illinois became the first U.S. school district to celebrate Eid al-Adha, a Muslim high day, as a school holiday Talk about your surrender, and they did it in lieu of Veterans Day. This is blatant surrender. In 2014, Rocky Mountain High School in Fort Collins, Colorado, became the first high school to recite the Pledge of Allegiance in Arabic, replacing the One Nation Under God with One Nation Under Allah. In 1996, Bill Clinton became the first U.S. president to hold an Eid al-Fitr dinner at the White House to celebrate the end of Ramadan, the Muslim month-long dawn-to-dusk fast, and it including the raisings of hands and shouting Allah Akbar to declare that Allah, the moon god, is the greatest and only God. In 2000, the Republican National Convention became the first U.S. presidential convention to open with a Muslim prayer to Allah. In 2007, Quran, for the first time, was used to swear into office a new U.S. Congressman, Keith Ellison. In 2009, Hudson County Superior Court Judge Joseph Charles Jr. ruled in SD versus MJR that Muslim ex-husband repeatedly had sexually assaulted his Muslim ex-wife, both before and after their divorce, following testimony from the Muslim man's imam. However, the judge denied the ex-wife's request for permanent restraining order against her ex-husband. Why? Citing that the Muslim man's belief and practices. That the court believes that the defendant was operating under his belief, that is, as the husband, his desire to have sex with and whether she wanted to or not. And it was something that was consistent with his practices. He was recognizing Sharia law. In 2009, a Christian U.S. soldier at Bahrain Air Force Base in Afghanistan received Bibles in 2 local languages sent by his American church as planned. The U.S. military confiscated those Bibles, and instead of at least returning them to the church, they burned them. By contrast, when Terry Jones, pastor in Florida, announced he planned to burn a copy of the Quran in 2010, General David Petraeus, the commander of the U.S. military force in Afghanistan at the time, publicly objected to his plan, while U.S. Secretary of State Clinton denounced the plan as disgraceful. But yet they allowed the military to burn the Bibles. And to attract and manage Middle Eastern Muslim wealth, an increasing number of American financial institutions are becoming Sharia compliant. This requires donating a percentage of their annual profits to Islamic organizations designated by their Sharia-compliant advisors, many of whom are members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and funneled money to even terrorist groups, even though donations must go to one or more of 8 recipient categories, one of which is Jihad. Muslim taxi drivers are challenging local authorities for the right to refuse to pick up blind passengers with seeing eye dogs, while Muslim supermarkets cashiers are challenging their employers for the right to refuse to sell products from pigs. Both are considered unclean in Islam. Well, I hope this gives everybody a little bit something to think about. And don't forget, you can download the End Time News Radio app right from the website at wdeanshook.com. And as usual, when the dust settles and the smoke clears, I'll be back with more Truth in the News. I'll see you then. Thank you.
You can get these full stories and more at wdeanshook.com. That's wdeanshook.com.